There's no one among us who doesn't recognize the Great Pyramid of Giza. No one who hasn't seen the iconic Sphinx, the massive stone guardian with its missing nose. But the truth is, we still don't know how these pyramids were built. And we don't really know whose face the Great Sphinx was modeled after, or why the pyramids were shaped like triangles in the first place. What's even more surprising is that many people don't realize all of this was built around 4,600 years ago, yet still stands to this day. How is that even possible? We all know names like Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, or Napoleon Bonaparte. But strangely, when it comes to the pharaohs, things get blurry. Sure, some of us recognize names like Ramses II, Tutankhamun, Akhenaten, or Cleopatra VII, some of the most famous rulers in Egyptian history. But what actually is a pharaoh? Who were they really? Were they truly human? Or, as the legends claim, were they gods walking among men? And what about the mystery of the pharaoh's curse, the one said to have killed several people when Tutankhamun's tomb was opened? Why were the ancient Egyptians so obsessed with death that they created extraordinary techniques to preserve bodies for thousands of years? What exactly is contained in the Book of the Dead? And speaking of books, what knowledge was lost when the Library of Alexandria, the greatest library of the ancient world, burned to the ground? Did humanity once have far more advanced knowledge, only to lose it all? How could a kingdom that survived for more than 3,000 years, longer than ancient Mesopotamia, China, or even Rome, simply collapse and disappear? Is it possible that the same mistakes could happen to us, and that we too might collapse without even realizing it? And before we laugh at people who worship their kings as gods, should we look at ourselves, and how we glorify other humans as if they possess divine power? Let's trace the footsteps of this ancient civilization and dive deep into the mysteries of Egyptian history. Egypt as we know it today didn't just appear out of nowhere. Long before the first pharaoh and the rise of the Great Pyramids, there was an incredibly long journey that shaped this civilization, starting from prehistoric humans to the early communities living along the Nile, all the way to the pre-dynastic era where society became more complex, cities emerged, and Egypt moved toward unification under its first pharaoh. It all began roughly 2 million years ago, when early humans started using Oldowan stone tools, which later evolved into the Acheulean tradition, hand axes and flake tools crafted for hunting. Evidence from places like Wadi Halfa in modern Sudan shows that around 100,000 years ago, they likely used these areas as temporary camps or tent sites. About 60,000 years later, humans began using sharpened spears. Stone, animal bones, and hematite became essential materials for hunting and fishing. As the Sahara gradually dried out, groups of humans migrated toward the Nile Valley, where the environment offered far better conditions for settled life. Like many ancient civilizations, Egypt grew around a great river. Mesopotamia thrived between the Tigris and Euphrates. The Indus Valley civilization expanded along the Indus River. Ancient China developed near the Yellow River. And Egypt, along the longest river in the world, the Nile. This is why the ancient Egyptians revered the Nile. It shaped every aspect of their civilization. Hapi, the personification of the Nile, was believed to bring prosperity through the annual floods that fertilized the farmlands. Ancient texts describe Hapi as, "You who come from the hidden land, you fill the earth with life, giving water to the thirsty, enriching the black soil of Egypt. You flow with generosity, bringing wealth to the two lands, satisfying gods and humans with endless abundance." Around 13,000 years ago, humans began gathering wild wheat, using stone sickles and grain grinders. These communities developed early forms of agriculture, cultivating wheat and barley, building small round houses, and forming simple social hierarchies. Copper tools also started appearing, hinting at early trade networks. By 4,000 years before the Common Era, Egypt's early cultures blended farming and hunting lifestyles. Trade increased, and social hierarchies became more visible, marked by elite tombs and common worker graves. Cities like Hierakonpolis, Nikyata, and Abydos grew rapidly. Copper tools became common, and people were now familiar with early chariots. This era also produced legendary figures such as Scorpion I and Scorpion II, rulers believed to have played key roles in the late pre-dynastic transitions that eventually led to the unification of Egypt. That unification finally happened around 3,100 years before the Common Era. A king from Upper Egypt named Narmer, also known as Menes, conquered Lower Egypt and united the two lands. He established the first capital at Memphis and marked the beginning of the Pharaonic Age. With his double crown, the Pes Chent, symbolizing both Upper and Lower Egypt, Narmer created a legacy that would last for more than 3,000 years. As Egypt became unified, the core elements of its civilization began to take shape. The pharaoh was regarded not just as a king, but as a god on earth, the living embodiment of Horus, the sky god, responsible for maintaining the balance of the world. Interestingly, the word pharaoh is not actually the name for a king. It comes from the ancient Egyptian term Pharaoh, meaning great house, originally referring to the royal palace, not the ruler himself. It was only around 1400 years before the Common Era that the term began to be used to refer directly to the king, which is why we don't really know the actual personal names of the earliest pharaohs. A vast bureaucracy soon emerged, with provincial governors, called nomarchs, managing large regions, overseeing taxes, food distribution, and especially the harvests along the Nile Valley. The earliest kings were buried in Abydos, at el-Kab, inside rectangular tombs called mastabas, the architectural ancestors of the pyramids. As time went on, royal tombs grew more elaborate, and so did the divine status of the kings. Religious structures that were once built from wood evolved into stone temples. Major cities like Memphis and Abydos developed great temples that became the spiritual centers for their primary gods. Later texts, especially the pyramid texts, include hymns such as, "Greetings to you, Ra, who rises in the sky, who illuminates the world with your beauty. You are Lord of the gods, creator of all things, who lifted the heavens and established the earth." Egyptian religion would eventually include more than 1,500 gods, most of them representing natural forces, the sun, the river, the rain, the desert, and more. Unlike many ancient mythologies, where gods are portrayed as emotional or easily angered, Egyptian gods often appear mysterious and distant. Their personalities are vague, perhaps intentionally so, because they represented forces of nature, forces that humans could observe but never fully understand. Ancient inscriptions describe the pharaoh as an eternal earthly presence, judging humanity, calming the gods, and upholding Ma'at, the cosmic order, as the counterpart to chaos. He offered sacrifices to the gods and funerary offerings to the blessed ancestors. His divinity was granted through rituals and reinforced through warfare, although even then, his power still remained below that of the great gods. As the bridge between the human world and the divine realm, the king was the physical manifestation of a god on earth, a concept reinforced by layers of religious metaphor and doctrine. At the same time, he represented humanity before the gods. The pharaoh was the son of Ra, the one who brought the light of the sun to humankind. They called him the bridge between heaven and earth, the shepherd of the people, the tongue of the gods, the mountain that supports the sky, the falcon watching over the land, the pillar of the world. Pharaoh Senusret III was often depicted with oversized ears, not because he actually had them, but because he was imagined as a ruler who listened to every word of his people. The Egyptians believed in Ma'at, meaning balance, order, and cosmic harmony, the idea that everything in the world must remain in equilibrium. This belief likely came from observing the annual flooding of the Nile, which brought both destruction and fertile soil. The flood symbolized birth, death, and rebirth. The repeating cycle of day and night reinforced this belief. Death was not an ending, but a transition into another form of existence. And so it was with the pharaohs. They did not die, they were reborn among the gods, continuing to guide Egypt by choosing and blessing the next pharaoh, who would serve as the new link between heaven and earth. This is why ancestors held an incredibly important role in Egyptian life. They were honored through funerary rituals, and many believed that they could intervene in earthly matters. As a result, tomb construction and preparations for the afterlife became essential for everyone, from common citizens to the royal elite. Art also evolved. Hieroglyphs, written symbols representing sounds and ideas, became tools for recording taxes and inventories. The Sarek, an early royal emblem, displayed the king's name framed within a stylized palace facade with the falcon of Horus perched above it. Reliefs showed the pharaoh as an absolute ruler, striking down enemies and maintaining dominance. Egypt didn't just grow internally, it began expanding outward. They established trade outposts and settlements in Canaan, and extended their influence southward into Nubia, a region rich in gold and natural resources. This early dynastic period eventually ended around 2696 years before the Common Era, when Egypt began constructing massive pyramids and developing a far more complex bureaucracy. The last pharaoh of this era, Khsekhemwy, faced civil war but ultimately restored unity. After his death, the pharaohs who followed would embark on some of the greatest architectural projects in human history. This was the age when the pyramids began to strengthen the divine identity of the pharaoh. The idea of the pharaoh as the living incarnation of the god Horus was no longer questioned. They had already built an absolute government in which all people were expected to submit to the king. Power became more centralized and more visible than ever before. Every autonomous province was ruled by a governor, called a nomarch, who answered directly to the pharaoh. This political structure made the construction of the pyramids possible. Imhotep, the chancellor of Pharaoh Djoser and a legendary genius architect, is believed to be the mind behind the first great stone monument in human history. He transformed the early mastaba tombs into the first prototype of the pyramid, using massive limestone blocks instead of clay and wood. This innovation became the foundation of all monumental architecture in ancient Egypt. Later, Pharaoh Sneferu built three major pyramids: the Midim Pyramid, which partially collapsed, the Bent Pyramid in Dashur, which served as an architectural experiment, and finally, the Red Pyramid, the first true, smooth-sided pyramid in history. His son, Khufu, went on to build the Great Pyramid of Giza using more than 2.3 million limestone blocks, each weighing several tons. It became the ultimate symbol of divine kingship and eternal power. Pharaoh Khafra built the second pyramid at Giza and is widely believed to be the creator of the Great Sphinx, a colossal sculpture with a lion's body and a human head, symbolizing royal strength and protection. The third pyramid was built by Pharaoh Menkaure, smaller in size but more artistically refined, decorated with elaborate reliefs and monumental statues. The Sphinx's face resembles Khafra, leading historians and archaeologists to believe he commissioned it and that the Sphinx represents his own divine image, possibly the manifestation of Horus of the horizon, protector of the kingdom and the rising sun. But the truth is, we may never know for sure. Another great mystery is how the Great Pyramid of Giza was built. Originally standing at about 146 meters and weighing around 6.5 million tons, the structure contains more than 2.3 million blocks of limestone and granite, each weighing between 2.5 and 80 tons. How did humans construct something like this? And what was it truly for? Officially, archaeologists believe the pyramids were not simply tombs. They were spiritual monuments, temples of transformation, symbols of the pharaoh's ascent into the realm of the gods. But there's a problem. The Great Pyramid contains no mummy. In fact, many pharaohs' bodies have never been found in their supposed tombs at all. Whether their mummies were stolen or buried elsewhere, we still don't know. This era is known as a time of prosperity and expansion. Egypt seized gold and copper mines in Nubia and Sinai, securing great wealth for the kingdom. Fortresses and Egyptian settlements were built along the Nile and the Sinai Peninsula to secure these resources. Their irrigation and water control systems grew more advanced, supporting a population of about 1.6 million people around 2500 BCE. Egypt traded with the Levant, Punt, and Mesopotamia, importing cedar wood from Lebanon, spices from Punt, and bronze from Western Asia. Egyptian society was extremely hierarchical, with the pharaoh at the top. Most Egyptians were farmers living in small villages along the Nile. They grew wheat, barley, onions, and legumes. They worked the fields, but during the annual Nile flood, they were assigned to royal construction projects such as pyramid building. Part of their harvest also had to be paid as tax. Life was difficult, but they were not slaves. They had homes, families, and could work in temples or state projects to earn extra food or luxury goods. The pyramid builders were skilled laborers, not forced slaves. Graffiti found at the construction sites even shows pride and camaraderie among the workers. Egyptians believed that after death, their souls would be judged by Osiris. If they lived a good and just life according to Ma'ah, they would enter the field of reeds, a heavenly paradise. If they failed, their heart would be devoured by the monster Ammit, and their existence would end forever. They were taught that rebelling against the pharaoh could endanger their souls in the afterlife. Temples and priests reinforced that social harmony and obedience were part of the path to eternity. This strengthened the people's loyalty to the state. No one wanted to lose their place in the Egyptian afterlife. But even a golden age does not last forever. The Old Kingdom began to decline as provincial governors, nomarchs, grew more powerful and started to challenge the pharaoh's authority. Some even became independent rulers, breaking ties with the capital. Geological evidence also shows that Egypt suffered extreme climate change and severe drought, leading to crop failures, famine, and social crisis. When Pharaoh Pepi II, who reigned for more than 90 years, finally died, Egypt entered a period of instability. The kingdom fractured into smaller states. The tradition of pyramid building ended as the pharaohs lost control, and Egypt descended into an age of chaos and division. After the collapse of the Old Kingdom, caused by drought, political instability, and the weakening of the pharaoh's authority, Egypt entered what historians call the First Intermediate Period, often referred to as Egypt's Dark Age. The death of Pepi II split power into three competing factions: the Memphis faction, the Heracleopolis faction, and the Theban faction. Power shifted constantly during this time. The ancient Egyptian historian Manetho even wrote that 70 pharaohs ruled in 70 days, a dramatic way of showing just how unstable and chaotic the era had become. Although no clear records or archaeological evidence survive for many of these supposed rulers, we do know that the kings of Heracleopolis in Lower Egypt eventually seized control from Memphis. They claimed to be the rightful successors of the pharaohs and attempted to restore stability in their territories. Their first known ruler, King Aktoi I, was infamous for his cruelty and madness. Legend says he was killed and eaten by a crocodile, likely a myth, but a powerful illustration of the violent and unpredictable nature of the era. Heracleopolis dominated the north, while Thebes controlled the south. The governors of Assuq became crucial allies of Heracleopolis, serving as a defensive barrier against Theban expansion. This period was filled with chaos, conflict, and moments of heroism. One governor, Onktifi of Heracleopolis, wrote that he saved his people from famine and attempted to conquer Thebes, but failed. Meanwhile, Thebes rose in power. The line of Theban rulers known as the Intif kings began conquering city after city in Upper Egypt. One of them, Intif III, captured Abydos and pushed further into Middle Egypt. Eventually, Mentuhotep II of Thebes defeated Heracleopolis and reunited Egypt under a single rule, marking the beginning of the Middle Kingdom. Because of the political turmoil and economic hardship of the era, only a few pyramids or major temples were built. Even the tombs of nobles became much simpler compared to earlier times. Art also changed dramatically. Figures were depicted with thin faces, large eyes, and weaker bodies, a reflection of the struggles and suffering of the age. The famous Ipuwer papyrus describes Egypt in a catastrophic state. The river is blood, yet people drink from it. People wander in thirst. The poor now possess great wealth, and the one who never owned sandals now owns treasures. Ipuwer laments that the pharaoh, who should have been wise and powerful, had lost control, while ordinary people rebelled and chaos swept across the land. Yet despite the turmoil, this long struggle eventually led to Egypt's reunification, renewed stability, and the cultural revival that defined the Middle Kingdom. After Egypt was reunited under Mentuhotep II of Thebes, the Middle Kingdom, often called Egypt's Second Golden Age, began. This era saw extraordinary achievements in politics, the military, art, literature, and economics. Thebes became the temporary capital and the heart of political power. Meanwhile, the cult of Osiris rose to prominence, strengthening the pharaoh's authority through religion. Nubia was reconquered, and Egypt regained control over Sinai and key Levantine trade routes. Amenemhat I, the third successor after Mentuhotep II, founded a new and strategically located capital, Itoi, near the Fayum Oasis, about 60 miles southwest of modern Cairo. To restore order, the overly powerful provincial governors, known as nomarchs, were stripped of much of their influence and replaced with royal officials. At the top stood the vizier, who managed administration in the courts, allowing the pharaoh to regain true absolute power. Senusret I and Senusret II later expanded Egypt's borders all the way to the Second Cataract of Nubia. Expeditions to Punt and Syria secured gold, incense, and cedar wood. Massive fortresses were built in Nubia to protect Egypt's southern frontier. Amenemhat III intensified mining and agricultural projects. The gold and copper trade from Nubia and Sinai flourished, and large-scale irrigation transformed the Fayum from desert basin into fertile farmland. The peak of ancient Egyptian literature also emerged during this period. Philosophical and moral stories blossomed. The tale of Sanu, following an official who fled to a foreign land before returning to Egypt, highlighted loyalty and national identity. The shipwrecked sailor told of a man who survived a shipwreck and met a giant serpent on a magical island, symbolizing Egypt's greatness and humanity's destiny. The dialogue of a man with his baw explored despair, the meaning of life, and the relationship between a person and his soul, one of Egypt's deepest philosophical works. These writings revealed the spirituality, wisdom, and worldview of the Middle Kingdom Egyptians. Art and architecture evolved as well. Statues and reliefs became more realistic and expressive, and pyramid construction shifted from solid stone to mud brick cores with stone casings. Concepts of the afterlife grew more complex. Maps of the underworld were created, along with detailed instructions on how to avoid dangers after death. The coffin texts replaced the Old Kingdom's pyramid texts, making afterlife knowledge accessible beyond just royal tombs. But like all golden ages, decline eventually followed. The kings of this period were not as strong as the rulers who rose from earlier chaos. Prosperity created comfort, and comfort weakened leadership. Meanwhile, foreigners from the Levant, known as the Hyksos, gained control of avarice in the Nile Delta. Their influence spread, and they slowly took over northern Egypt, ending the Middle Kingdom and beginning the Second Intermediate Period. The idea that hard times create strong leaders may sound cliché, but history often proves it true. Crisis forged figures like Mentuhotep II and Ahmose I, who rose after periods of turmoil and reunified Egypt. On the other hand, long-lasting prosperity can dull the sharpness of leadership, as seen in the Middle Kingdom rulers who failed to hold their authority. And from this weakness, Egypt entered its second dark age. Sobneferu, the first confirmed female pharaoh in Egyptian history, took the throne after the death of Amenemhat IV, as there was no legitimate male heir. But when Queen Sobneferu died without a successor, the dynasty collapsed, reopening the long-standing problems of royal succession. Central authority weakened. Provincial governors, known as nomarchs, regained power. Natural disasters and unusually low Nile floods led to food shortages and famine. At the same time, foreign groups from the Levant and Western Asia, most notably the Hyksos, began exerting pressure on Egypt's eastern borders. The ruling dynasty still held Itui, but it was no longer as strong as those before it. Kings came and went rapidly, territorial control shrank, and Egypt lost its grip over the eastern delta. The Pyramid of Kenjer became the only major pyramid built during this troubled era. Eventually, the next dynasty split away and ruled from the western delta, but their influence was weak, making it easy for the Hyksos to dominate. The Hyksos, meaning rulers of foreign lands, were immigrants from regions corresponding to modern-day Palestine and Syria. They initially entered Egypt as merchants and laborers. Over time, they rose to power not as invading conquerors, but as immigrants who gradually took control of the delta. They established their capital at Avaris in northern Egypt. The key to their rise was their control over Levantine and Mesopotamian trade routes, as well as their superior military technology. Horse-drawn chariots and advanced bronze weapons, which Egypt had not yet adopted. Their most prominent ruler was King Apophis. Even though native Egyptian dynasties continued to exist in the south, they could not match the Hyksos' strength. Several attempts were made to fight them, but none had significant impact. After decades of conflict, a new leader appeared, Ahmose I. He finally drove out the Hyksos, reunified Egypt, and founded a new dynasty, marking the beginning of the New Kingdom, one of the most powerful eras in Egyptian history. The New Kingdom, also known as the Egyptian Empire, was the Golden Age of ancient Egypt, a period when the civilization reached its greatest territorial expansion and became one of the dominant powers of the ancient world. After Ahmose I expelled the Hyksos and pursued them deep into the Levant, he rebuilt Egypt's war-torn economy and secured the Nubian frontier against attacks from Kush. His successor, Thutmose I, became the first pharaoh to reach the Euphrates River in Mesopotamia. He conquered territories in the Levant and Nubia, strengthening Egypt's administration and laying the foundations of an efficient imperial system. During this era, Hatshepsut emerged as one of the most influential female pharaohs in history. To solidify her legitimacy, she adopted the full royal titles of a pharaoh and ruled as a king, not a queen. She revived long-lost trade networks disrupted during the Second Intermediate Period and constructed her iconic mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari. Then came Thutmose III, often called the Napoleon of Egypt, the most successful military pharaoh Egypt ever produced. He conquered more than 350 cities and built the largest empire in Egyptian history. His victory over a coalition of Near Eastern kingdoms at Megiddo cemented Egypt's authority across the Levant. Amenhotep III brought Egypt into an age of extraordinary wealth and stability. Under his rule, Egypt reached the height of its cultural and economic prosperity. He built magnificent monuments, including the Luxor Temple and the Colossi of Memnon, and practiced advanced diplomacy with Babylonia, Mitanni, and the Hittites. Military power reached its peak under Seti I and his son Ramses II. Seti successfully confronted the Hittites, one of the great powers of the ancient Near East, based in Anatolia, modern-day Turkey. Through multiple campaigns in the Levant, he restored temples, reinforced borders, and secured Egypt's influence. Ramses II, better known as Ramses the Great, is one of the most legendary pharaohs in history. He led the famous Battle of Kadesh against the Hittites, the largest chariot battle ever recorded in the ancient world. He later signed the world's oldest known peace treaty. Ramses built a new capital at Pi-Ramesses and constructed the grand temples of Abu Simbel. His reign of 66 years made him one of the longest ruling monarchs in human history. But as always, great glory was followed by decline. Egypt, a land-based power for most of its history, eventually faced a massive invasion by the Sea Peoples, mysterious groups attacking by both land and sea. Although Ramses III managed to defend Egypt, the wars drained the kingdom's resources and triggered economic collapse, inflation, famine, and even the world's first recorded labor strike in Deir el-Medina. The pharaohs from Ramses IV to Ramses XI struggled to maintain stability but failed. Egypt suffered from droughts, poor harvests, and widespread corruption. In the midst of this chaos, the people sought new meaning. Religion became a tool to restore order, offering hope and legitimacy to rulers rising during the crisis. The priests of Amen in Thebes grew incredibly powerful, so powerful that Egypt eventually split in two. Lower Egypt ruled by Smendes, and Upper Egypt controlled by the Amen priesthood. The Third Intermediate Period began after the death of Pharaoh Ramesses XI in the year 1077 before the Common Era. His death marked the end of the New Kingdom and the beginning of a long era of political decline, fragmentation, and foreign intervention. Egypt split into two competing powers, in the north, Smendes I, and in the south, the high priests of Amen, who despite not being pharaohs, held power equal to one. Strangely enough, both sides were ruled by members of the same extended family. The growing authority of the Amen priesthood weakened centralized control. Many royal mummies were secretly relocated to safer tombs in Thebes to protect them from looting. But from the Libyan Meshwesh tribe, Shoshenq I seized power and established a new dynasty. He ended the dominance of the Amen priests in Thebes, launched a campaign into Jerusalem, and briefly reunified Egypt. But that unity lasted barely a century. Soon, Egypt fractured again. Shoshenq III ruled Lower Egypt, while Takelot II and Osorkon III controlled Upper Egypt. From the south, the kingdom of Nubia saw an opportunity in Egypt's instability. Hiei of Kush marched north, conquered all of Egypt, and established a new dynasty under Nubian pharaohs such as Shabaka, Shabitku, and Taharqa, who built temples across Egypt and Nubia. But Nubian rule would not last. A new threat emerged: Assyria. Under Esarhaddon, the Assyrians invaded Egypt and captured Memphis, the capital of Lower Egypt. Pharaoh Taharqa tried to resist but failed. He retreated to Thebes, still claiming the throne, but Assyria struck back with overwhelming force. Thebes was brutally sacked, ending Nubian control once and for all. With the Nubians driven out, the Assyrians appointed Psamtik I as pharaoh, placing Egypt under a vassal dynasty. But Psamtik understood clearly, as long as Egypt remained an Assyrian client state, it would never reclaim its destiny. When the Assyrian Empire began collapsing under the pressure of wars against Babylon and Media, Psamtik seized the moment. He expelled the Assyrian garrisons, forged alliances with the Greeks, and strengthened his army with foreign mercenaries. With his new military power, he reunited Egypt and erased Assyrian influence, marking the rebirth of Egypt's final native dynasty. His success was not merely nationalism. It was a calculated political strategy to restore Egypt's independence after generations of foreign domination. After the defeat of the Nubians, Psamtik I of Say rose as pharaoh, and his expulsion of the Assyrians restored Egypt's unity. He strengthened the administration and military, rebuilt diplomatic ties with the Greeks, allowed Greek colonies to flourish in Egypt, and attempted territorial expansion into the Levant, though ultimately losing ground to Babylon and Persia. The height of this era came under Amasis II, who expanded Egypt's trade networks with Greece and the Mediterranean world. But this prosperity came to an end with the Persian invasion led by Cambyses II in the year 525 before the Common Era. Cambyses defeated Egypt at the Battle of Pelusium, reducing the once powerful kingdom to a satrapy, a province, under the Persian Empire. Persia's influence was immense. Their king of kings, Darius I, constructed major infrastructure projects, including a canal linking the Nile to the Red Sea. Later, Xerxes I faced multiple Egyptian rebellions, one of which eventually succeeded. 50 years after Persian rule began, Egypt regained its freedom under Amartayus of Say. Egypt remained independent for nearly 60 years. Nectanebo I strengthened the kingdom and repelled Persian attacks, while Nectanebo II became the last native pharaoh of Egypt. But in the year 343 before the Common Era, Persia, under Artaxerxes, invaded once more and reconquered Egypt. It seemed the nation would never reclaim its former glory. And then everything changed. A young, unstoppable commander from Macedon appeared, one whose ambition exceeded anything the ancient world had ever seen. Alexander the Great marched into Egypt in 332 before the Common Era without facing a single battle. The Egyptians welcomed him as a liberator from Persian rule. Alexander founded the city of Alexandria, which would later become the heart of Hellenistic culture, science, and philosophy. With his arrival, the late period of Egypt came to an end, giving way to the Hellenistic era and the rise of the Ptolemaic dynasty. Egypt transformed into a new kind of kingdom under Alexander the Great. After his conquest, he placed one of his closest friends and Macedonian generals, Ptolemy I, as the ruler of Egypt. This marked the rise of the Ptolemaic kingdom, a dynasty that would last nearly 3 centuries, making it the final and longest-lasting ruling house of ancient Egypt. After Alexander's death, Ptolemy broke away from Macedon and declared himself king of Egypt. At first, the Ptolemies embraced a strong blend of Greek and Egyptian culture, a cultural and religious syncretism visible in their government, art, religious practices, and daily life. The kingdom was ruled as an absolute monarchy, where the king held full authority, just like the pharaohs before him. Yet despite adopting Egyptian traditions, the Ptolemies preserved Greek culture at the core of their political system. The Ptolemaic rulers even adopted the title of pharaoh to gain legitimacy among the Egyptians, though in practice they continued to use the Greek royal title basileus. They placed Greeks and Macedonians in the highest political and military positions, while Egyptians occupied lower ranks, unless they fully adopted Greek culture. Their army consisted of Greeks, Macedonians, Thracians, and many foreign mercenaries. Over time, more and more Egyptians were recruited into the military as well. Religiously, the Ptolemies introduced the cult of Serapis, a new god created by merging Egyptian deities such as Apis and Osiris with Greek gods like Zeus, Hades, and Asclepius. Like the ancient pharaohs, Ptolemaic rulers were also worshipped as divine figures. Many temples were restored or rebuilt, including Edfu and Dendera. One of the dynasty's greatest achievements was the founding of the Library of Alexandria by Ptolemy I, expanded by Ptolemy II into the largest scholarly center of the ancient world. The Museum of Alexandria became home to legendary thinkers, such as Euclid in mathematics and Eratosthenes in geography, who advanced global knowledge. Economically, Ptolemaic Egypt thrived. Agriculture and trade flourished. They monopolized grain production, a crucial commodity in Mediterranean commerce. They improved irrigation, expanded farmland, including reclaiming land in the Fayum region, and established Egypt as a major trading hub connecting the Mediterranean, Africa, and India. By the 3rd century before the Common Era, Ptolemaic Egypt was the wealthiest and most powerful kingdom in the Hellenistic world, rivaling the Seleucid Empire to the east. But by the 2nd century, internal conflicts began to tear the kingdom apart. The costly Syrian wars drained resources, political rivalries sparked civil wars, and Egypt gradually became dependent on Rome, whose power was rapidly rising. The last ruler of the Ptolemaic dynasty was Cleopatra VII, who attempted to preserve Egypt's independence from Rome. She formed alliances with Julius Caesar and later Mark Antony, but their forces were defeated by Octavian, who would become the Emperor Augustus, at the Battle of Actium. In 30 before the Common Era, after the defeat of Antony and Cleopatra, Egypt was annexed by Rome and became an imperial province. This marked the end of the Ptolemaic era, and the end of ancient Egypt's age of pharaohs. I have added Egypt to the empire of the Roman people. With these words, Emperor Augustus summarized the Roman annexation of Egypt after the defeat of Cleopatra VII and Mark Antony. As an imperial province, Egypt was governed not by the Senate but directly by the emperor, because Egyptian grain was crucial for feeding Rome. The province was placed under a praefectus, an equestrian official with full authority. The first prefect, Gaius Cornelius Gallus, was removed for arrogance. Initially, 3 Roman legions were stationed in Egypt, later reduced to 2 as Roman control strengthened. Rome attempted to expand its influence through Egypt. The prefect Aelius Gallus launched a failed expedition into Arabia, while Petronius led a campaign into Nubia, forcing Queen Candace of Meroe to negotiate peace. Under the Pax Romana, Egypt reached a period of remarkable prosperity. It became a political and economic center visited by several emperors, including Vespasian, who was first proclaimed emperor in Alexandria. But Egypt also became a land of revolts. The failed coup of Avidius Cassius, and later the uprising of Lucius Domitius Domitianus, which was brutally crushed by Diocletian. The Library of Alexandria, the greatest repository of ancient knowledge, did not vanish in a single catastrophe. Instead, it likely disappeared gradually through war, fire, and neglect. A major fire may have occurred during Julius Caesar's siege of Alexandria. Later, Emperor Aurelian's campaign destroyed parts of the city where the library once stood. In 391 of the Common Era, Emperor Theodosius I ordered the destruction of pagan temples, including the Serapeum, which is believed to have housed some of the library's remaining collections. Manuscripts, fragile and easily burned, vanished during a time of chaos, leaving behind one of the greatest mysteries of the ancient world. Economically, Rome maximized Egypt's wealth. High taxes and grain production turned Egypt into the empire's breadbasket. Major cities retained limited administrative autonomy, but heavy taxation and social inequality placed increasing pressure on the local elite. By the late 3rd century, inflation and economic crisis pushed emperors Diocletian and Constantine to enforce major reforms, reshaping Egypt's taxation and administrative structure. After the fall of the Western Roman Empire, Egypt remained under the Eastern Empire, Byzantium, but maintaining control became increasingly difficult. Persia briefly conquered Alexandria before Byzantium reclaimed it, but the empire was too weakened to defend the region from the rising Arab forces. On the 29th of September, 642 of the Common Era, General Amr ibn al-As entered Alexandria without resistance after 3 years of conflict. Many Egyptian cities surrendered peacefully, as the Coptic population felt oppressed under Byzantine rule and offered little support to the empire. The Islamic conquest of Egypt ended nearly 1,000 years of Greek and Roman dominance. It reshaped the region's political, religious, and cultural landscape, replacing the old Greco-Roman order with a new Islamic theocracy that connected Egypt to the emerging Arab world. Egypt went through countless conquests. Yet its civilization didn't simply vanish, it transformed, absorbing and blending with Greek, Roman, and later Islamic culture. During the Ptolemaic era, Egypt became the beating heart of Hellenistic culture. Under Roman rule, it remained a global center of trade, scholarship, and religion, with Alexandria standing as a city of knowledge and spiritual exploration. After the Islamic conquest, Egypt evolved once again, this time into a major center of Islamic scholarship, home to Al-Azhar, one of the oldest universities in the world. And even under later empires from the Mamluks to the Ottomans, Egypt's core identity survived. Today, Egypt is still one of the world's great civilizations, ancient, enduring, and very much alive. But Egypt didn't just leave behind monuments. It left behind mysteries, layers of unanswered questions that still puzzle historians. How were the pyramids truly built? Even Egyptian records don't fully explain it. What we have are theories, ramps, levers, or perhaps technologies we no longer understand. Did the pharaohs hide the real story? Much of Egyptian writing is royal propaganda, created centuries after events occurred, leaving historians to question its accuracy. Even Egypt's great collapses remain uncertain. Did the Old Kingdom truly fall due to famine and civil war? Archaeology shows no clear evidence of massive starvation or conflict. How much did climate change shape Egypt's destiny? And the Library of Alexandria, perhaps the greatest loss of ancient knowledge, remains an enigma. How and when was it destroyed? No one knows for sure. Two of history's most iconic figures are still missing as well. Where is Cleopatra's tomb? And where is Alexander the Great buried? Countless mysteries remain. How much of Egyptian history actually happened? And how much is myth created by pharaohs or by later historians? And how did the world's longest-lasting empire truly fall? Or, did it ever fall at all? Maybe the real mystery is this: the fact that we don't know what truly happened. Perhaps that is what keeps Egypt's legacy alive. Thank you.